It's unbelievable. I go out with my crew every day. They're tremendous people, and we love McDonald's. It's great. I mean, I live on McDonald's and Diet Coke. It's a tremendous diet, and look at how trim I look. I'm the handsomest president in the world.
Welcome back to Thinking Critical. This is Wes, and today I'm going to talk about parody and satire in the age of Trump with comic book writer Mark Pellegrini. Now, this conversation was recorded early last week, and at the time of the recording, I was unaware that Mark and his creative partner, artist Tim Lim, they were going to start crowdfunding their Walmart trilogy trade paperback on Indiegogo this week. So I put off releasing this video until Sunday so I could do a live stream with both of them on Thursday. If you haven't checked that out, it's a great conversation. It's about an hour if you don't have that much time. But I did want to let you know before we get into the conversation that the Indiegogo for Walmart Gold Standard is live and ongoing. I think there are only 40 physical copies of the book left. And after that, there will only be the PDF version for $10, which for 114 pages is a great deal. But $20 for a 114-page trade paperback of the entire trilogy with extra bonus materials is a great deal. If you're interested in that, there is a link to the Indiegogo in the video description. And now let's talk to Mark Pellegrini about parody and satire in the age of Trump. You know, I know you and your creative partner, Tim Lim, you've done some parody comics, most notably My Hero MAGAdemia, Walmart's second term. And now we just got word that Walmart Chapter 3, The Magalorian, is actually going to be going straight to comic shops through Antarctic Press here in July or August.
Yep, so we're foregoing a campaign on Volume 3. It's going to go direct to market through Antarctic Press, so you just need to go to your local comic shop. It's already in previews, so you can just go there and ask them for Walmart 3, The Magalorian, and they will go ahead and put it in your box for you.
Now that this book is coming out, you know, as a parody, you know, a satire type of book about political figures, how much hate does this kind of thing bring to you? And like, do you have to have thick skin just to even attempt a book like this anymore?
So there's never a safe time to do a political parody because politics, by their very nature, are always going to be polarizing, and they're always going to be they're easy to set people off. It's like, you know, choosing a sports team. You know, if you're a Redskins fan and you meet someone who's wearing a Cowboy jersey, you automatically just hate them on sight. You never want to be their friend. And it's just kind of that way with politics as well. So when Tim and I did our first political parody, which was Thump, The First 100 Days, it was a satirical children's book. It's on Amazon. We published that in 2017. And we got absolutely eviscerated by the mainstream media. They did so many hit pieces on us and on Tim. I mean, for a while it was kind of a running gag because all those media pieces like Vulture and Vice and BuzzFeed, they kept referring to Tim as a white supremacist and a white nationalist. And Tim's Chinese Filipino. He's not white. But they didn't care. They were all just, you know, doing the same talking points and just trying to destroy his character and destroy his reputation. They were attacking like me as well. But they really homed in on Tim because I guess he was the artist. But yeah, I mean, so you're going to get that kind of stuff all the time. And if you publish anything, even if it's not political in nature, if you just publish, Tim and I have done apolitical comics like Black Hops and Common America, and we see people talking mad shit about us online, you know, and people just ripping the comic and being critical of it. That's just the nature of putting out a product. You know, you're going to have people who like it and you're going to have people who criticize it. Just have to, you know, get over it, deal with it. Even if they're saying really nasty things about you, like calling you a white nationalist.
Do you think that because of, you know, you have written political satire, maybe that could be construed as pro-Trump, likely would be construed as pro-Trump, that people don't even read those books that aren't political in nature and just dump on them anyway, just so they can talk bad about you again? Oh,
yeah. I mean, there are people who just, all they want to do is trash us because they know that we're conservative leaning, or that we write books that they interpret it as conservative. And so they'll trash anything we write. They'll say that Black Hops is political propaganda, which it isn't. It's apolitical. They'll say the same thing about Common America. And even in Common America, we actually made a joke about that where, you know, you use the word America. That's too political. You can't use the word America. But that's the attitude people have. They see anything that's got a tinge of patriotism to it. They call that nationalism or jingoism, and they want to destroy it. You know, people like that, though, they're very irrational. And I'd like to think that the majority of readers and audience people are rational.
So you mentioned you guys made Thump the first 100 years, which is basically it's a pretty funny looking rabbit that looks like Donald Trump. It kind of makes fun of Trump supporters a little bit, but it's certainly pro Trump. Just making that bunny that looked like Trump. Do people think that gives them carte blanche to like ruin your lives or maybe try and get you fired from your other jobs and things like that aren't political in nature and have nothing to do with your writings in comic books?
Well, I mean, I can tell a story real quick about Tim. So they did Vice.com. It was either Vice or Vulture. They did a hit piece on Tim when Thump the First 100 Days came out and called it like a guidebook for white nationalism, which it isn't. It was a parody satirical children's book of what if the 2016 election was retold using animals. That's all it was. Tim has an article on the Transformers Wiki because Tim has done licensed Transformers work. And the people who run the Transformers Wiki do not like Trump. So they found that article and they used it as a source link on Tim's Transformers Wiki article to make the factual claim that Tim is a white nationalist. And they put that on his article, and we've appealed and we can't get it removed because no, it's the truth. We have a source link. Look, and the source link is to vulture.com making a BS statement about Tim. And so, yeah, that's on his article, and they do stuff like that. And Tim has been very supportive of Transformers Wiki. He did some charity work, and then I used to edit there and actually translated most of the Japanese stuff for them for their manga articles. And just like that, turned on him, turned on me, put it in his article calling him a white nationalist. And it's just the way it is. I mean, the second it's like I said, it's like sports teams. The second you're a Redskins fan, the second you find out that someone is a Cowboys fan, they immediately turn on them. And it's like that with politics too. You can be friends with someone for a long time, you can help them, be good to them, but the second they find out you voted for the wrong president, they just throw you right out the door, throw you into the bus.
So are you and Tim just gluttons for punishment? What makes you keep coming back for this stuff? Do you feel it's important to get this message out there and showing people that it's okay to make fun of politics, or it's okay to have fun in the political spectrum, and even maybe it's okay to offend people?
We're not going to let anyone intimidate us and tell us that we can't tell these stories, we can't make these jokes, we can't do this, we can't do that. I mean, you look at like the status of late night talk show television, and it's always a one-sided argument. Stephen Colbert is making the same jokes as that British guy with the bad teeth, as Jimmy Kimmel. They're all going out there every night and they're all making the same jokes from the same perspective. And you only get one side of the argument. You only get one POV on anything. The people who are trying to silence us, the ones who are doing petty things like editing Tim's Transformers Wiki article or doing, drive-by articles calling us this or that, they're of the same perspective. And so they want to silence any alternative viewpoints, even in humor, even as something as little as a satirical children's book. If we surrender, we just okay, it's not worth the heartache, we're just not going to do it anymore, then they win, and we don't want that to happen. So. And we just think these things are fun to make. So as long as they're fun to make, we're going to keep doing them.
Well, one of the things I've noticed about this, and like I said, I would definitely say it's more pro-Trump in nature, definitely more pro-Trump in nature, but it's not like you're not taking the piss out of everybody in these books. I remember specifically in Walmart second term, you used a pretty hot button issue there multiple times with Brett Kavanaugh, where you kind of portrayed him as Stone Cold Steve Austin, like drinking beers on the sideline. I could see that absolutely infuriating people on the left that didn't want him confirmed, but I could see that absolutely infuriating people on the right who thought that he was unjustly accused of things like that, and kind of was in a kangaroo court. You're messing with both sides, maybe not completely equally, but
that's the thing is, I mean, when I was, I guess in the 90s when I was younger, they would make fun of both sides. It wasn't illegal to make fun of, liberals, even in media made in California. Like The Simpsons used to be very even-handed with their political parodies. They made fun of Bill Clinton just as much as they made fun of George Bush. And even though they did that whole episode with George Bush, when he moves in next door, the Two Bad Neighbors episode, they did that one less in the response to his politics and more to get even with him because he made a direct anti-Simpson statement at a speech. And they were just taking the piss on him. But I mean, there's If you go back and you watch those episodes, it's remarkable how even-handed they are. There's the one where Bart gets that elephant, Stampy, and Stampy goes on a rampage in town, and he runs through both a Republican rally and a Democrat rally, and there are jokes about both, and he does them, in tandem. And that's just the way things were, is that the era Tim and I grew up in is that you can make fun of both sides, regardless of which side you're on. I mean, it's okay. And so with Walmart, I mean, we all know what Donald Trump looks like. He's not a pro wrestler. He's not an Adonis of a man. He's overweight, and he's also in his 70s. But that's the joke, is that we draw him as more of like what Donald Trump sees himself as this huge All Might looking Superman kind of thing. That's a joke. We have a lot of fun, taking the piss out of that. And I think a lot of people enjoy reading it. We've had positive reviews from liberals who've read our book and thought it was really funny that we took this dumpy looking president who has a big ego, and we have him portray him as his idealized version of himself. And I mean, we voted for Trump, but we're not afraid to poke fun at him. And same thing with Brett Kavanaugh. If we're going to make fun of the shortcomings or the perspectives of liberals, like we make fun of Hillary Clinton, we had a whole storyline with her, then we can make fun of the perspective that Brett Kavanaugh is a drunken frat boy. That's funny, just because that's kind of what he was in his younger days, and he's not that anymore. But it's a larger than life personality, and so we want to try and get that intact for humor.
Honestly, it's the best joke you guys have had in any of your books that I've read, and I normally find them all very, very humorous. But that one just hit the spot for me, because I was like, man, they're pissing everybody off with that one. I was like, I like that. I like it when artists are fearless. It's quite apparent that you don't mind pissing the left off, and you certainly don't mind pissing the right off. When you're writing a parody or satire, I've seen a lot of parody and satire lately that isn't funny. When I read it, even if it's like from a perspective that's supposed to be my perspective and it's supposed to be geared towards me, I don't find it funny, because I find a lot of the jokes to be coming from a place of hate rather than a place of love.
They're malicious, yeah.
Yeah. What is about writing parody where, like, can you write it spitefully?
I mean, you can, and I'm certainly, when I was writing some of those Walmart, obviously there are real life personalities whom we satirized in the Walmart books that I personally do not like as a human being. Some of them, especially like Hillary Clinton. But that also didn't mean that when we wrote the Hillary, we call her Hillary in it. But when we wrote that storyline, she still gets her licks in when she's fighting Trump. We aren't just absolutely pretending like that she's just this grease stain that can be easily wiped up, But when doing things like that, you do have to have an even keel. When you're writing, you have to care more about, is the joke funny, not is it parroting my opinion on something. And that goes for all forms of writing. You want to write characters, not mouthpieces. A lot of writers have a hard time doing that. I mean, that's where the Lisa Simpsons and the Brian Griffins come in, where like you watch, a Family Guy, and then Brian goes off on a rant about, this or that, and it's not funny. That's not Brian Griffin. That's just Seth MacFarlane. Like there's a really old episode of Family Guy where Brian's setting up a cutaway gag, and he's like I can find him, Peter. I found George Bush after Hurricane Katrina. And then it's like a cutaway of Brian Griffin running into a backyard and yelling at a treehouse like, President Bush, your people need you. And then Bush is like, no, I'm not coming down. And it's not funny. It's really, really not funny at all. They put in a very bad joke just because they wanted to make a statement about George Bush. And you can tell watching that it's cringy and bad and unfunny and zero effort. And it's the difference between a show like Family Guy, when they do things like that, and a show like South Park, where Trey and Matt are very moderate, so they really don't care who they piss off or who they make fun of. And that's almost, in a way, it's like a standard for how to write political parodies, is that you have to, regardless of what your personal opinion might be, you shouldn't let it interfere with your endeavor to be funny, because you're writing a comedy and the comedy comes first.
Think about Trey and Matt in South Park. Those guys are absolutely fearless in their satire and their parody. They will go after anybody if they think the joke is right. And that's why I do appreciate South Park. I don't watch it, like I did when I was younger, because I'm in my 40s now. But they were very equal opportunity, and as far as I can tell, they still are. As far as they will take the piss out of anybody if you put yourself out there and it warrants it.
What scares a lot of people is that if they build up their personal brand on a singular perspective, like Jimmy Kimmel, if he builds himself up as the liberal comedian who only makes fun of conservatives, he's only going to have a liberal fan base. And then when he finally makes a joke at the expense of a liberal, his fan base is going to riot, and they're going to drop him or walk away, and he's afraid of that. So he's basically written himself into a corner. He's put himself in a box. He can only make one type of joke at one type of target, and he can't step outside of it, or he'll lose a chunk of his very narrow fan base. Whereas people on South Park, Trey and Matt, they built up a fan base on both sides of the aisle and in the center of the aisle. And if they lose some because they made an episode where their joke disagrees with that person's personal viewpoints, then they don't care, because they're appealing to everybody. Not every episode is going to align with your POV on things. Like, I didn't agree with the episode they did. It's an old episode, but it was the one about the Star Wars special editions. And it's a really funny episode. I just didn't agree with the lesson at the end where they say that, no, once you create something, the fans own it, and you don't have the right to alter your work in any way. I'm like, well, that's not entirely true. I mean, the fans don't own something you created. They have every right to be critical of it. But you also have, if you want to mutilate your own art, you have the right to do it. It is your property. But I mean, just because I disagreed with the moral of that episode, that didn't say, like, I'm never watching an episode of South Park again because I disagree with them this one time, because I can also think of the millions of episodes I've watched where I did agree with them. So
we talk about comic books, but stand-up comedy has really become like a battleground. You've seen so many comedians who back in the day were almost fearless, like your Sarah Silverman's, your Jimmy Kimmel's. Remember him back on the Man Show. Yeah. And now they're so apologetic, and they want everyone to forgive them for making jokes back in the day. Whereas you see other people like Dave Chappelle would be the biggest one that's saying, you can't censor my humor. I am allowed to take the piss out of anybody and everyone. I don't care if you agree with me or not, but freedom of speech here. I don't like being censored. There's kind of a battleground there.
I mean, that is something that we should be trying to avoid, especially just in comedy in general, is that there should be no protected class when it comes to comedy, who you can make fun of, who you can satirize. Like, that's dangerous. You can't regulate comedy like that. You can make bad jokes and off-color jokes and jokes that don't land and jokes that aren't funny, or jokes that are more insults than they are humor. And then let that be judged accordingly by the audience, because that's dangerous and that's censorship. And comedy is the one thing that really shouldn't be censored.
Political correctness in today's culture is kind of run amok, and everyone's just so ready to be offended. It's almost, you get almost a visceral a feeling with it. Finally, I was offended. I can finally be a part of the movement.
It is bizarre. I think it's because people get rewarded for being offended now when they didn't used to. We used to make fun of somebody for getting offended. Like, Jesus, man, like, lighten up, when someone said that they were offended. But now, they go on Twitter, they go on social media, and they say such and such made a joke and it made me feel uncomfortable. And then they'll immediately get, a rush of support, and they'll get a huge serotonin boost when they get all these people telling them, like, oh, poor baby, shh, and like this person was wrong. We got to fight back. And so people want to get offended because they want that reward for being offended. But now the culture has changed, and so there's just so much attraction to cancel culture and to offense culture. Unless the culture changes and we stop rewarding people for being offended, which free speech, I guess we can't, then I kind of feel it's just going to get worse. And I don't see it turning around.
Well, I certainly see it getting worse in the very near future as we head up to the next election. We're already in the cycle. Obviously, it's been a little off because of COVID-19, but things are going to pick up, and obviously your book's going to come out, and you guys are going to get some more hate as you keep moving on, with your comic careers.
This election is going to be very strange, especially because of the whole pandemic leading up to it. You can already predict the talking points that both sides are going to make. The left is going to say, don't vote for Trump because he caused this pandemic. and then the right's going to say, like, vote for Trump. He did everything he could to prepare for the pandemic, but the left wouldn't let him, like Pelosi in Chinatown, that kind of stuff. And it's going to be, we've already predicted the talking points that they're going to have back and forth. I don't think there's really going to be any surprises. The ferocity of it, we saw in 2016, probably the most savage presidential election I think we've ever had. I can't think of anything more mudslung in any election than that, at least not in my lifetime. And I don't know if we have the stamina to do that again. If people really want to go through the 2016 presidential election cycle again in 2020, especially after, this whole COVID-19 thing, they've managed to stay mad for 3.5 years, but eventually that dies down. People just get sick of it. So we'll have to wait and see. Certainly there's going to be the same actors who are going to be doing the same statements and taking the same offenses and making the same headlines and hashtags. But how many people in the general population are going to follow along with it? We'll have to wait and see.
Very well said, my friend. I really appreciate the time today, giving some perspective on parody and satire in a very polarized time as we come up to the next election cycle. Really appreciate the time.
Hey, thanks for having me on.